football is coming off of its second consecutive loss, and it was another really brutal one for the Panthers, especially when you look at the spread going into it and the type of game they needed to bounce back after the SMU game. And it comes right before their toughest test in Clemson. The Tigers will arrive in Pittsburgh on Saturday for a noon kickoff. And we're going to talk all about it, both the Virginia loss and the upcoming Clemson matchup and what's at stake the rest of the way for the Pitt Panthers. Welcome into the Pittsburgh Sports Now Football Pulse. I'm Nathan Breisinger, joined alongside by Karl Ludwig, the two Pitt football beat writers over at PittsburghSportsNow.com. And Karl, this was a game against Virginia. We'll start there. The loss, second consecutive one, and man, was it bad. Just from the first snap, there was a procedural penalty. So that kind of set the tone very similarly to the Rashad Battle missed tackle in Dallas, kind of sort of set the tone, kind of told you what this game might be about. And really, it kind of went off the rails a little bit from there. Obviously, the score doesn't show it, but it just didn't seem like the Panthers had their fingers on this one really at all in this game against Virginia. Then you have penalties across the board, you have injuries across the board, and of course, it comes down a little bit to an officiating error, and that we'll have to talk about as well. But just the overall scope of this game just was not handled well by the Panthers. Lack of focus, again, falling flat against an inferior opponent, just something that can't happen. Karl, first initial thoughts on this loss against the Cavaliers?
Yeah, it was obviously it's a horrible loss. I think it's in my opinion worse than the loss to SMU. Like you mentioned, inferior opponent with a whole lot on the line, ACC hopes, college football playoff hopes. So there was a lot to play for, and after a week of practice in which everyone was preaching how it was much more intense, much more focused, everyone was ready to roll. They came out extremely flat again. I think it was 5 procedural penalties in the first half from the offensive line and the receivers. And Cade Bell wasn't happy about it. We're talking about the receivers, and Pitt didn't show up. Pitt had a massive opportunity against the opponent they should have beaten up on, and they couldn't. They couldn't do anything offensively. It was another sloppy game. Pitt wasn't ready for it again, and it showed on the field in a major way in the first half. And yeah, you can point to some officiating stuff, which it should be talked about. There was bad officiating, but Pitt had a chance to go down and score late to take the lead and win the game. Didn't happen. There were chances throughout the game to kind of impose your will, take control of the game. It didn't happen. So this one's, I'd say it's more so on the Pitt Panthers than anything else, and losing the game that they should have won, and should have been another launch point toward the end season goals, which seem a little bit out of reach now.
And looking at some of the numbers from the game, Pitt 11 penalties for 75 yards. They had 6 drops, which was their most by receivers this year. That's 10 total in the last 2 games. 6 against Virginia, 4 against SMU. They didn't have a drop the previous 2 games against Syracuse and Cal, and only had 3 across the first 7 games. So that's becoming a concerning issue for a veteran, a really solid receiver group that's supposed to be a strength. And then obviously, we see Konate Mumfield come out of the game, Dejon Reynolds come out of the game, 2 of their, more consistent receivers. And they're most likely questionable for this upcoming Clemson game. And then the quarterback, Eli Holstein, coming out after, very obvious targeting was called. But Holstein comes out of that game looking very shaken up. Looks to be a head injury potentially. Again, still questionable on if he plays or not. He was 10 for 23 in the game, didn't throw for a touchdown in the game. And then Nate Yarnell comes in, and man, he was not much better at all. And for even though Holstein came out and what he was able to do in the first 2.5 quarters, he threw a lot of passes behind players. We're starting to see that a lot more. His touch is a little bit off. And again, it's just sort of him being a redshirt freshman, learning from his mistakes. But Yarnell comes in. He gets his opportunity. He goes 4 for 12, 2 picks. The second drive, like his first full drive of the game, starts with a delay of game. Not sure if we've seen that all season from this up-tempo offense from the Panthers. And then he throws a pick on the very first throw of the drive. So Yarnell, really, really rough going for him. And Pitt, it's going to be interesting to see how this quarterback situation's handled, or what it will be this weekend against Clemson if Holstein can go, or if not, it's going to be Nate Yarnell in there.
Yeah, I mean, there's no confirmation on the injuries to Eli Holstein, but it appears to be two head injuries within 3 weeks, which does not bode well for his status this weekend against a very physical Clemson defense. I wouldn't be surprised if Nate has his first start of the season, and I'm sure the Pitt staff knows. I'm sure Pat Narduzzi and Cade Bell know who's starting this week, and I'm sure they've been practicing with that um, with that in mind. And I'm not sure who it is yet. I don't think anyone can be 100% certain yet. But if it is Nate Yarnell, they'll have to make sure that he was prepared well in practice and given the reps that he does not get on a weekly basis. And Cade Bell mentioned that this week when we talked to him. He said that it's had Nate hasn't done a whole lot with the first team offense. He hasn't had those reps. He was a little late in making that throw on the interception, and you could tell he just wasn't quite prepared to run that offense. And even it was an offense that even was kind of slowed down a little bit because he doesn't know or he hasn't had that experience with it yet. So if it is Nate this game, they'll have to make sure that he is ready through practice. They'll have to make sure that he steps up and just fires the ball when the play is there, when the opportunity is there. And I mean, it'd be tough either way with Eli or Nate. This is a very good Clemson defense, and they're going to have to clean up a whole lot of stuff on the offensive line, procedural. The receivers will have to lock in. And it's going to be a very tough game, no matter who's playing at quarterback. But if we had to guess right now, might be leaning toward Nate Yarnell just with the kind of the severity of the injuries to Eli Holstein.
And yeah, you also touched on the offensive line. They had some issues as well. Ryan Baer had a really rough game. First game at left tackle, with a new sort of alignment with Isaiah Montgomery making his first career start, and it just wasn't that great for Pitt. A lot of penalties just overall, as we talked about. And we got to talk about, though, I mean, this didn't make or break the game per se, but it did allow Virginia to connect on some points, kick a field goal, make it a one touchdown game. Pitt needed to score a touchdown in order to win instead of just needing a field goal from Ben Sauls, and he's been pretty money all year. Got to talk about the officiating mistake. It's 4th and 1 now. Now, albeit that Pitt allowed too many big plays previous to that got it to the situation, but it's 4th and 1. Virginia snaps the ball quickly, and Pitt comes up, makes the play. They're short of the sticks pretty clearly. However, the officials come over, the sound system and say the officials were not in position, and that play had to be replayed. And I mean, man, was that such a big call in this game, an officiating gaff. And you look at some of the rules in the rule book that should have never been able to happen, that replay on 4th and 1. Instead, since Virginia snapped the ball prematurely, it should have been a 5-yard delay of game penalty, but it wasn't. Carl, just want to get your thoughts on that overall situation. I'm sure you looked into it a little bit more than I have.
Yeah, well, it's just so hard because the ACC has done a very poor job of explaining exactly what happened and explaining what should have been called. And I mean, when we asked the ACC after the game about an explanation, all they did was restate what happened. And if you're going off the rule book of what happened with failing to uh, communicate with the ref on the snap, there should be a 5-yard penalty on UVA. So I'm just as lost as everybody else is. It's a pretty inexcusable mistake in a major moment in the game, and it wasn't the only one. I mean, you can look back at the 2 point conversion attempt, which Pitt converted. Um, Ryan Baer is blocking his defender. Defender falls down. They call a hold on Ryan Baer, and Pitt doesn't get the 2 point conversion on the second attempt, and that's another huge swing in the game. So it's not that there was just one kind of singular moment of bad officiating. There was multiple chances where the refs kind of blew the game, and unfortunately, that's a trend that's kind of continued on throughout the season at times across the landscape here. And I know Pat Narduzzi won't talk about it anymore. He got fined 5,000 for the comments against West Virginia, but just it's two officiating errors in major moments that did ultimately impact the outcome of the game, and that can't happen in moments like this where there's major opportunities on the line. So um, the obvious 4th and 1 penalty. I mean, if you're going by the letter of the law, that should be a 5-yard penalty on UVA. So it's hard not to feel like Pitt was kind of given a little bit of a rough time there, but it's inexcusable, can't happen. It did happen, unfortunately. And like you mentioned, Pitt had chances to end that drive, the 3rd and 15. Get out, you can stop them there, get out of it. There's chances after that to stop them. It was very bad luck on a very bad night, which kind of compounds into what happened against Virginia.
And I'll restate it again. If Virginia does not get that first down, they're kicking a field goal, or they're not kicking a field goal there, and it's a turnover on downs, and Pitt is down by 2 points, and they can go and win the game right there with Ben Sauls. And you don't need Nate Yarnell to force it downfield. You just need to pick up a little bit of chunk yards here and there to get into field goal range and let Sauls kick the game-winning field goal. That's all you need at that point. However, you can't let that call and the holding call overshadow just everything that happened. As you said, it all compounded all these mistakes, these issues. And I'll go into this a little bit here. I mean, you look at Pitt and overall with Pat Narduzzi over the years, this happens way too frequently. These games, when Pitt is rolling, they have the momentum going, and in a game that it's an inferior opponent like SMU. Okay, that happens. That was a really good team. Pitt still, they struggled, and obviously they hurt themselves. But against a team, you're favored by 7.5 points, 4-4 overall, one of the worst defenses in the conference, and you just sort of fall flat again. I mean, not to pull at the heartstrings of the Pitt fans, but this is a game that Penn State never loses. Penn State is so good at beating inferior opponents, but for Pitt to get the next level of the program, and again, you take it with a grain of salt this year because they exceeded expectations so far. I mean, 7-0. I mean, well beyond what you sort of expected this year. But at this point in the season, what we've seen, and then for this to come out and just happen, I mean, lack of focus, sort of lack of preparation. That first drive, I mean, Poppy Williams, a false start to start the game. Two other penalties to start in that drive. And then Poppy Williams drops a pass on that drive. I mean, everything just immediately was thrown in your face on that first drive. Was sort of how that game was. It's all foreshadowed in that first drive. So, I mean, that's a game you really cannot lose, especially with the momentum you've had, even with the SMU loss. But now they go into Clemson, the 28th ranked team, and Clemson's been a pretty big matchup nightmare for Pitt over the years, except obviously in 2021. I think Pitt got the best of them in 16, obviously the huge upset, but I mean, 2021 was the best game they've played against them in general. And just sort of, they didn't have a chance to the Tigers, but also that was a down year for Clemson. Now Clemson 6-1 in conference, 7-2 overall, with a loss to Georgia in there and one ACC loss. Now coming off of a Virginia Tech win, 24-14. This is a tough Clemson team, Carl. I mean, what do you make of the Tigers this year coming into Acrisure Stadium?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it's the game in 21 where Pitt beat them in a down year. I wouldn't say this is a down year for Clemson, but it's not. They're not a national title favorite. They're 7-2. They just lost to Louisville a couple weeks ago. They got stomped on by Georgia in the start of the season. This is a team that can be beaten, but this is the Clemson team that's also has huge offensive line, defensive line combos. They have huge players, maulers. They're very athletic, and they have great skill position players. They don't use the portal. It's a homegrown Dabo Sweeney team here, and they have a good quarterback. They have a good running back. They have decent receivers. They're fast. They're physical. It's kind of like playing SMU again, where there's just a bunch of great athletes all across the field, and they move fast. And it might be the toughest defensive test of the year so far for Pitt, and we're not sure who's playing quarterback yet. But we've seen how it's gone against tough defenses so far recently. I was entering the SMU game. This was a game I thought Pitt could make a statement in. They could come out and play good offense. They could run the ball. They could burn some clock. They could move fast. They could play solid defense. But now I don't know. I don't feel very good about this game now. Pitt isn't playing well offensively. The offensive line has been very shaky. And it'll be tested again against a great defensive line and great linebacking core. And I don't know that's going to have any time for quarterbacks to sit back and throw. I'm not sure if there'll be any run lanes for Desmond Reed or Daniel Carter or whoever's back there. It's just it's a matchup nightmare for Pitt. But it's also one of those games where it's like, yeah, you're coming off two bad losses. This new Pitt team comes out and plays extremely well, and you're left wondering who who and where they've been. Um, I'm not expecting a Pitt win here, but I think this is a game where if kind of the luck bounces to Pitt side this time, we could see a game where it's like, oh, Pitt did it again. That they won a ranked game for like the eighth season in a row that they probably shouldn't have won. So I think it'll be either a kind of resounding Clemson win or a very, very, very close Pitt win in at the end of the game here.
And you talk about luck, going Pitt's direction. You think back to that 2021 game. Kenny Pickett had 2 touchdowns in that game, but you think about one of the luckiest plays we've seen in a while. Servasier Dennis just shoots the A gap, and Uyunglele goes for the shovel pass, and it's just right to Dennis, and he takes it to the house. So you need something kind of like that in this type of game. Now the defense we've seen, and even against Virginia, now SMU was a slaughtering, but the defense has still played really solidly. But there needs to be something offensively to hang your hat on. You need to find something to break through here that we haven't seen in the last 3, 4 games, whether it's really establishing the run, if that's Des Reed, if that's Daniel Carter, mixing in whoever you need to get, if that's bringing Derek Davis back in, um, to just get some new juice in there, some trick plays. We really haven't seen Pitt go for any sort of trick plays for this up tempo, you know, big strike offense. We haven't seen, K Bell try any like flea flickers, stuff like that. Double reverse passes that Virginia did and got a big, 30-yard gainer to Calandria catching it. SMU tried it, but it didn't go very well for them. Ball fumbled, but Pitt couldn't recover. But maybe it's time for Pitt to sort of let it all out of the bag. Someone I saw on Twitter said it's time to flip all the way to the back of the playbook. And maybe this is exactly the game you have to do so offensively because nothing, and I mean nothing is working. And you're going to have guys in there. I mean, we may see Lamar Seymour playing at receiver just because of potential injuries that are going on there at the receiver position. Who knows could be in that quarterback. I mean, just let it all out. I mean, yes, there's probably going to be mistakes to be made, but you got to find a way to get something going here against Clemson because it just hasn't worked in the last 3 to 4 games. Now, defensively, Pitt is going to have their hands full. Cade Klubnik at quarterback, he's been pretty excellent over the past couple of years. But Phil Maffa at running back, man, he is the 12th best rusher and at the FBS this year with 981 yards, 8 touchdowns. He's 6'1", 230 pounds. Very reminiscent to Marion Hampton. Pat Narduzzi alluded to that during his press conferences this week. This is a guy that's going to be very tough to stop. Pitt's D line in front is going to have a really tough challenge with that. And this is a Clemson team that they're ranked 7th in the FBS in yards per game, 473.4 yards. So this is a Clemson offense that's going to be really tough. So Pitt's offense has to match up with them no matter what. So final thoughts on this game for you, Karl. You have any sort of prediction for this one, how it might go?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, this is a game where Pitt cannot afford to make mistakes. If Pitt comes out like they did against Virginia, it'll be a very long night or long afternoon, and it'll be a major Clemson win. So Pitt has to clean up the mistakes. There cannot be any procedural penalties. There cannot be mental lapses and no miscommunications. I feel better about the defense and the offense, obviously. I think the defense will put on a good battle here and really kind of. I think they know that Phil Maffa will get 35 carries in this game, and they'll be focused and they'll be secure in their fits and alignments. And Cade Klubnik will have a tougher time against this Pitt defense, but I don't trust the offense. I mean, it's a ragtag bunch now. The offensive line is still looking for its best 5 guys 10 weeks into the season. It's just I think it's one of those games where Clemson kind of comes out and controls both sides of the line. They run the ball well, and they leave with a 35-14 win. Not feeling great about Pitt. It's a great Clemson team. There's no shame in losing to a great Clemson team, but I think this just with the way Pitt's playing and the uncertainty in offense and the way that they played over the last 3 or 4 games, I think it's too much for the Pitt defense to weather alone. And Clemson leaves and ultimately with a 35-14 win, kind of pouring it on a little bit late as they wear down the defense and kind of control time of possession.
And this is a Clemson team coming in favored by 10 points at this point by ESPN, the 20th ranked team in the college football playoff. I'm right there with you, Karl, and I think Pitt gets maybe 14 points. That's my number. I think Clemson wins this one 28-14, one less touchdown for the Tigers offensively. But yeah, I mean, Clemson just, I think they're just too tough. It's one of those games that it's like, it's a tough matchup. It doesn't match up well with Pitt. And, you know, but this is a game that Pitt could, though, try to make a statement and respond here. Everything is still kind of there, with their goals and expectations, to be, potentially a 10-win team. They have to win out from this point forward. But who knows? There's also still a very, very difficult outside shot that they could make the ACC championship. SMU's in the driver's seat there, and then it's Clemson, Miami, and Pitt. So anything can happen in these next 3 weeks, but it has to start with this one. But I just don't think, they can do it, especially after what we saw against the Virginia team last week. And, I think the most disappointing thing a little bit about it, on the outside of things is we talked about it. We always, think about the attendance and we put our number down before the game. There was 56,000 people in attendance against Virginia. That's probably the most we've seen for a non-big name team. Clemson had about 60,000 in 21, and then you got your Notre Dame's, Penn State's, and West Virginia's. But that was a big crowd. And I expect it to be another big crowd right around that same number here against Clemson. So Pitt has to do something to show their fans that it's worth following this team for the last 2 weeks of the season following this game. So they have to do something, but I have Pitt falling 28-14. All right, that'll do it for this episode of the Pittsburgh Sports Now Football Pulse. We appreciate you tuning in, and be sure to check out all of our coverage over at pittsburghsportsnow.com. Throughout the day on Saturday, again, a noon kick for the Panthers and the Tigers. For Karl Ludwig, I'm Nathan Breisinger. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Pittsburgh Sports Now Football Pulse.